Okay, I know in your sections you've gone through the exam as well, but I thought I'd take a few moments at the beginning of the class if you have any questions about the actual correct responses. On the board here, I put what the statistics are. I know some of you haven't had any statistics, but nevertheless you know about how to compute an average and how to compute a standard deviation, right? But for the exam, the average score was almost 76. The standard deviation was 13 and a half. The lower quartile, that's to say the lower 25% of the distribution, was less than or equal to 66. The mid-range, namely the range from the 25 percentile up to the 75 percentile, range from 66 through 87, and the top quartile, the top 25% were all numerical scores above 87. Moreover, there were a number of people who got perfect scores, which is a good thing, right? Okay. Let me go through this very quickly because you've already covered it in your sections. And by the way, for those of you who haven't had any prior statistics or haven't been exposed to regression analysis, you won't be held responsible for that in this course. But at the same time, if you've got some basic understanding, it's going to make the assimilation of the reading material much easier. So the GSIs will, in their sections next week, spend a little bit of time on a tutorial with regard to basic statistics and how to measure demand relationships or supply relationships or what's going to turn out to be willingness to pay. And I will set up a couple sessions, special sessions for you as well, separate from your GSI sections. Okay, I think all the true and false should be fairly clear, right? You all understand that at this point, right? There's no mysteries with regard to the true or false. Okay? Linear demands, which we covered that specific question in class. The first major problem, as shown here in the solution, you can solve that either with calculus or just setting out a complete table and looking at the relationships between total revenue and quantities and measuring the marginal revenue for an increment in quantity. And what you want to do is, of course, find the point at which marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. And that is the decision rule, right? That's the decision rule for maximizing profits. All right, and this is setting it out in table form rather than using calculus. And then the question about finding the quantity that maximizes social welfare, that's not going to be the quantity at which marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, right? Because we know if, in fact, the marginal revenue is below price, there are still some gains from trade that could take place, right, in moving from the quantity at which marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost to the quantity at which price is equal to marginal cost. And at that particular equilibrium solution for that output, that is going to be the output that maximizes total surplus, which is also the maximization of economic efficiency. Okay, then we turn to the next problem, and some of you got this straight away. In other words, you didn't go through the process of shifting the demand and then looking at what would be the new equilibrium and showing the consumer surplus for the new equilibrium versus the old equilibrium. You can put the wedge directly on the original graph, right? So either answer is correct. One is much simpler than another. Here is the actual solution represented with regard to a shift in demand. The shift in demand comes from, this is the original demand curve, this is the new demand curve, D subscript T. But I could have, instead of going through the process of shifting the demand curve, I could have looked at the wedge that was going to be introduced as a result of this tax that's being imposed here. And immediately, if that is the price that has to be paid by buyers after the imposition of tax, this triangle is a new consumer surplus, right? Yes?
I have a question on this.
Yes?
I mean, if we didn't match up our lines a little differently.
Yes?
Given that we didn't have rulers.
Yes, and by the way, okay, now if that happens and there has been a discount, that is to say you've been given less points than you think is correct, simply because your ruler was crooked or whatever, then the first step is to go to your GSI. If you can resolve it with them, that's fine. If a dispute remains, guess who gets to decide? Okay? That is to say, you don't have to agree with the GSI. If the GSI has spike preferences and convinced they're right and you're wrong, and you still have spike preferences, and you believe you're right, I will resolve it. Okay? Fair enough? All right. Okay. The incidence, once again on the incidence, we have to compute what was the original equilibrium versus the new equilibrium and figure out what is the resulting burden associated with each of the consumers on one side of the market, the suppliers on the other side of the market, and here is the answer for that particular computation. Okay? That's simple. Okay, the next one went to negative externalities and imposing a corrective tax and recognizing that there's a difference between private cost and social cost. We covered it, I thought, in a crystal clear way in lecture and in the readings as well. And here is the distinction between the private cost and the social cost, and how would we go about getting the social optimum. And the social optimum would be at this particular point, not at this equilibrium point here. Jimmy?
Where's the
Social value curve?
Yeah, the question wants the demand curve, social value curve, private cost curve, and social cost curve.
Yeah, right.
There's social value.
No, you didn't miss anything. But is there any facts in this question to suggest the social value curve or the social demand curve is any different than the private demand curve? Yeah, exactly. And, you okay? Are you all right? Okay, so there's only a negative externality here. If there was a positive externality, then you would have to visit the question of whether the private demand curve is the right social demand curve. And if there's a positive externality, that wouldn't be true, right? But the only facts you're given is about gasoline consumption and that generating a negative externality with regard to degradation of air quality. I mean, we didn't go through all the analysis with regard to air quality, but that's underlying this particular question. Okay, so once you have that basic formulation, it's a simple matter to look at what the new equilibrium would be, and moreover, to achieve efficiency, that is to say, maximizing now social surplus, not private surplus, but social surplus, requires you to be at the social optimum, which is labeled here as Q subscript optimum. Okay? All right, then the next question went to our analysis of game theory in oligopolistic market structures. And here, what's interesting about this question, the reason that we like the question, is because it turns out there is a dominant strategy for one of them, and there isn't a dominant strategy for the other. But more importantly, in the real world, there are empty threats everywhere, right? Companies make statements about what they're going to do if, in fact, you lower your prices or if you enter the market. And the question is, are those threats credible? And what's interesting about this question is if, as it turns out, Big Brew has a dominant strategy, if Big Brew comes along and says to Little Brew or Little Kona, there is such a company, by the way. It's not called Little Kona, but Kona. If Big Brew made the threat that if you enter the market, I'm going to lower prices, and Little Kona does the analysis and says, wait a minute, for Big Brew, there's a dominant strategy. The Big Brew would keep prices high. Hence, is that a credible threat? The answer is no, it's not. Yes?
But if Big Brew could sustain a loss by having a low price for long run, essentially kick Little Kona out of the market instead of making 3 million, making 7 million.
Yeah, but is there any, by the way, what you just described is predatory pricing, which is taught in a serious way in PhD courses in economics, not in the first beginning course of economics. But your intuition is dead right. But since you've opened this can of worms, stop and ask yourself the question. If Big Brew actually kept prices low to drive Little Kona out of the market and then raise their prices, what prohibits Little Kona to re-enter the market? Got it? Okay. Okay. Any other questions about this? Yes?
Why is it Little Kona's dominant strategy to affect the market?
Ultimately, yes, it is. But it turns no. The Big Brew has a dominant strategy. If you look at the outcomes with regard to maintaining high prices versus low prices, it's clear. With regard to Little Kona is looking at two different decisions: whether to enter or not to enter. Right? And if you look at the outcomes for those two choices that Little Kona can make, Little Kona does not have a dominant strategy, and that is explained. And the outcome, the Nash equilibrium outcome, is going to be that Big Brew will maintain the high price, and Kona will in fact enter because it doesn't treat the threat of Big Brew as being credible, given that Big Brew has a dominant strategy. Yes.
But is it advantageous for the enter?
Yes. That's the Nash.
That's not dominant strategy.
No. It turns out, but no. It's a question. If you come back here and look at the actual. See right here, this last sentence. Kona does not have a dominant strategy. Come back and look at Kona. I guess we're going to have to go through the details, all right? So if we look at Big Brew, high price versus low price. So we look at the outcome for Big Brew regardless of whether Little Kona enters or doesn't. So it's clear that there's a dominant strategy for Big Brew. But now look at the same question with regard to Little Kona with regard to entering versus not entering. There isn't, given its payoffs, a dominant strategy for just Little Kona.
But okay, I guess. It looks like entering. The way we were talking about it, right? Big Brew's going to make, like, it's 2 options much better on the left side and the right side. So you can those next to high price. But then entering versus not entering, like, it's a better option than enter. So that's dominant strategy. Why would you lose money?
Yes.
So the fact that you lose money makes it not dominant?
Well, because it's not, because see, the point about a dominant strategy is that one choice is always going to be better than the other choice, regardless of what the other player does. That's the point. Okay? All right. Okay. Any other questions? Yes. Are you getting your exams back? No, I'm going to keep them for perpetuity. Why would I not give you back your exams? Yeah, you'll get them back in your sections, okay? You'll get them back. What's the matter? You want them now? Pardon? Well, you know how hard that is? You know, there's over 100 people here. It would take us 15 minutes to distribute them all. Wait. Help me. They're not here, right? You have them, right? What? They're in Stan's office. Yes. No, they've been working very hard to get this right. Listen. Okay. Yeah, yes, the scores are posted. No. Wait a minute, stop. I, quite frankly, didn't anticipate this. I apologize. You will get your exams back in the sections. Number 1. Number 2, the scores are already posted on bSpace. No? Say what? Oh, it's released to me. That's enough. That's sufficient. That's a dominant strategy. Hey, by the way, I saw them all before I came to class, so I figured you guys had them too. Okay. We'll get them posted tonight, okay? You'll have them tonight, and you'll have your exams back at your next section, all right? Okay. Sorry about that. This is the histogram for the scores. What's good? It's almost a bimodal distribution. Remember, in the first class we said there are 2 types of people in the world, but almost revealed in this histogram. But regardless, what I showed you over here is reflected in this histogram. Okay? Okay. All right. Let's move on. Now, in the last lecture, we looked at one set of methodologies for dealing with non-market goods. That is to say, goods that are not priced. And we focused on revealed preference. We looked at 3 different methodologies that have been widely used. The travel cost methodology, secondly, hedonic pricing methodology, and then finally, averting behavior. We also noted that in revealed preference, you need fundamentally some related market for which you can measure values. Like, for example, in travel costs, you can measure opportunity cost of time. You can measure all of the resources that are used to access a particular natural resource. However, in those revealed preference methodologies, there is no way of determining non-use values or option values. They're only designed to figure out use values, members of the population that are actually accessing a particular resource. So today we want to move on to a different set of methodologies referred to as state preference. And before doing that, I want to spend a moment just talking about basic intuition. Remember when we looked at revealed preference and we said if a person travels to Tahoe instead of traveling to Tilden Park, they have revealed a preference, right, through their actual choices. Now, what lies behind that reveal preference? When we say reveal preference, revealing the preference of a particular individual with regard to the choices they make. But the choices that are made are directly determined by whatever the objective function of that person might be. And the objective function, generally in economics, is referred to as the satisfaction or the utility of that consumer or that individual in society. And the analogy you may find useful is to go back and think about a firm. When we looked at different market structures, we looked at competitive market structures, oligopolistic, monopoly market structures. All of those firms were maximizing objective function. What was their objective function? Profits. Simple as that. Just their objective function in all of those different analyses was that the firms are in the business of maximizing profits. Now, when we look at reveal preference, at its core is the presumption by economists that each of those individuals is maximizing their utility or their satisfaction. Why are they going to Tahoe rather than Tilton Park? Because presumably their utility is higher by going to Tahoe than it would be if they went to Tilton Park. And the reveal preference, or the actual choices that we observe, are the mirror image of whatever objective function those individuals have. Right? So keep that in mind, because in your readings for today, in one of the appendices, there's a discussion about RUM models, random utility models. So if you don't have some intuition about what utility is, that random utility model is not going to make any sense to you. But think about it very simply, that if somebody is choosing Tahoe instead of Tilton Park, it must be because they get a higher utility by going all the way to Tilton Park, given all the way to Tahoe instead of to Tilton Park. They must be achieving a higher level of their utility. Okay, so in state preferences, the methodologies that have been developed are referred to as contingent valuation. Now, we want to discuss how contingent evaluation studies are conducted, and this too takes us into a world of survey methodology. How do you design surveys, and then using statistical analysis to interpret the results of those surveys? What I'm concerned about is that you understand the common sense. I don't expect you next week or within the confines of this semester to go out and be able to design a survey and implement the survey. What are the strengths and limitations of state preference methods? And as I indicated, the major methodology for doing state preferences is contingent evaluation. Now, why the phrase state preferences? Because what you're doing through the surveys is asking individuals what their preferences are. So they're stated preferences, not reveal preferences. They're not actual choices that people are making. You're giving them hypothetical choices and trying to elicit what their state preferences are. Right? Okay. Now, I've already said what reveal preferences are. We have to have some relationship with other market goods that allow us to infer the value associated with any choices that are made through the three types of reveal preference methodologies that we discussed in the last lecture. And the problem with that methodology, it doesn't allow us to isolate non-use values or option values. And the mechanism for doing so, or the methodology for isolating option values and non-use values, is contingent valuation, or CVM. And you can tack this kind of methodology onto reveal preference to add to not only the use values of a particular environmental resource, but the non-use and option values as well. Now, this is something that I will hold you responsible for. And it's not going to be obvious, but I want you to think about it as we move through providing more meat on the skeleton of benefit-cost analysis. One way of checking state preferences, if you've got the right available data and facts, is to use reveal preference methodologies to corroborate or validate the state preferences. Now, I don't expect you to understand what I just said, but I want you to keep it in mind as we go along. You should be asking yourself, gee whiz, if someone does a survey and they ask them what is their willingness to pay to, one of the examples in today's lectures is preserve wolves in Yellowstone Park. And if somebody's an environmentalist, they're probably going to give you a much higher willingness to pay than what their true willingness to pay is. Right? Because if they know the ultimate determination is going to be some average across all the respondents in the survey, and if I really value wolves in Yellowstone Park, I may give you an exorbitantly high number, knowing that it will increase the computation of the average. And thus there will be more investment that will take place if the policymakers are basing their decisions about preserving or enhancing the habitat for wolves in Yellowstone Park. That may end up inviting strategic behavior. Right? Because when we look at oligopolistic interactions and look at game theory, we're really talking about strategic behavior, right? About how interactions will take place between a few players. Likewise, in surveys regarding stated preferences, there may be incentives for individuals to be strategic, to misrepresent, if you will, what their true willingness to pay is. Adam? Yes, it could be the result of peer pressure. Certainly, if you go to some communities in the United States and you're not a pure environmentalist, you could be ostracized. And there's other communities where if you were a pure environmentalist, you would be ostracized, right? Yeah, there is peer pressure. No question there's peer pressure. Okay. The methodology, as I indicated, it specifies surveys, and the ultimate purpose of all these surveys is to elicit the willingness to pay. And another way of referring back to our basic foundation in the first part of the course, what you're trying to do is find points along the demand curve. That's all. Now, it's a long route to get there, but your ultimate purpose is I want to know what society or different individuals in society